I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
Hello, everybody. You are watching the Cryptid Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Hamilton. You guys, thank you so much for coming back and checking out the show. Tonight, you guys, I got a pretty cool guest on tonight. I'll let him introduce himself. I'm sure if you guys are following any people in this cryptid community, you're going to know this name. But before we bring him on, I just want to say thank you for all your support to the channel. I do have a membership. It's $2.99. With that, you get a member exclusive early access to a Saturday show. I do those shows once a month. If you guys have had an encounter and you'd like to come on the show and share, please email me at thecryptidpodcast72. Again, thecryptidpodcast72 at gmail.com. Without further ado, let's bring our awesome guest on, Mr. D.A. Roberts. Mr. Roberts, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Man, I'm telling you, I've heard your name in circles. Didn't know how to get a hold of you. And then we have some mutual friends, and they said, we got to help you get him on. And here you are.
Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
So you are a best-selling author, and you are host of DAX
Machina.
What's that podcast about?
Well, originally it started out as kind of a way to interview people in the horror industry, be that writers or people in the movie industry. But it kind of expanded to encompass my cryptid research. And now we focus more on cryptids than we do strictly horror. But we still have the occasional guest. In fact, this coming Wednesday, Josh Nanokio from What Lurks Beneath is going to be on. That's going to be a good episode. But we try to touch on basically anything that goes bump in the night.
Awesome. So where can your podcast be seen or heard?
You can find us on Facebook and YouTube. We're looking to expand into Podbean and some of the others. We haven't done it just yet, but you can find us on YouTube every Wednesday and Saturday night live at 8 p.m. Central.
Awesome. So are you located in Missouri or Arkansas?
I'm in Missouri.
At
the moment, I'm in Springfield, Missouri, but I grew up on a farm just north of Lebanon, Missouri.
Okay. All right. Perfect. And so let me ask you this. What got you into the whole realm of cryptids?
Well, that's kind of a long story, but it dates back to the early to mid 1970s in the Patterson-Gimlin footage. First time I saw that footage, I was a kid. I mean, little kid, like, grade school. Mm-hmm. And it was just absolutely hooked. And then, of course, there was kind of the Bigfoot craze right about then because The Legend of Boggy Creek had just come out. And I pestered my parents until my mom got me a bunch of those old Time Life books that had like the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and the Abominable Snowman and all those. And I just devoured those. But growing up on a farm in the hills of Missouri, back in the early 1970s, we didn't have cable. In fact, we didn't get a color TV until I started school. I mean, our television really didn't get many channels, maybe 3 on a good day. So, between chores and just being a naturally outdoors kind of kid, I spent most of my time outside. I didn't watch a whole lot of TV. I was either my nose was in a book or I was outside. And heard some strange things from the woods, but you just kind of blow that stuff off as a kid, just thinking it's just natural because you don't know not to believe it. Believe it's just something normal. But then, as I started getting more and more into Bigfoot, I started asking cousins and aunts and uncles and everybody, and of course, most of them just thought I was just a goofy kid. But my uncle Buddy, who was married to my mother's sister, he was full-blood Cherokee. He sat me down one day because we were out at his place. He had about 160 acres up against about 5,500 acres of a conservation land, and we were out at his house one day fishing. And I asked him about it, and he sat me in his lap, and he said, "I'm going to tell you something." He said, "Those things are real, and they're on this land, and you need to be careful. Don't be wandering off and stay out of the woods at night." And to get that kind of confirmation from a very no-nonsense adult, and he wasn't one for telling tales. He was just a very serious guy, very hard-working guy. And to get that confirmation from him, it was just from that moment on, I was just absolutely, anytime I could be researching a cryptid or something strange, I was in the middle of it. And a few years later, I had some experiences on his land, and that just absolutely gelled it.
Nice. Well, would you like to get into some of those?
The first encounter I had on his land was out. I think I was about 14 or 15, somewhere in that ballpark. It was deer season, and I'd gotten out to my deer stand pretty early. It was still dark, and like I said, he had about 160 acres up against about 5,500 acres of conservation land, and his nearest neighbor was a couple of miles away. He lived in the middle of nowhere, and there shouldn't have been anybody on his land hunting but me that day. He wasn't even out; he was at the house. And I get up in this deer stand, and I'm being absolutely quiet. I'm not making any noise. Got my rifle laid in my lap. Then there's a British 303, and to find me in the dark would have been difficult. Even though I knew exactly where the tree stand was, and my uncle did, but to walk directly up on that tree stand in the dark without me making any noise would have been pretty difficult. It would have been very hard for somebody to just stumble across me. But I was sitting in that deer stand. It was probably between 3 and 3:30 in the morning, and I started hearing footsteps approaching the back of the tree. And I assumed it was my uncle, but I could tell it was, somebody was approaching him on 2 feet. But then it occurred to me that, that wasn't the trail that approached the stand. That was coming out of the woods. And I waited until I heard him like very distinctly, just within like maybe 10, 15 feet of the tree that I was in. And I went, "Hey, who's back there?" Expecting it to be my uncle. But what I got was kind of bizarre. I just heard this big intake of breath, like a very powerful set of lungs, and then it goes, boom, and I hear it turn and start walking away. So I'm scrambling to get out of this tree stand, and it was a big tree. I couldn't lean around it and look behind it. So I get down out of the tree, I've got my rifle in my hand. I turn my headlamp on because I had a little bandana, little elastic strap light on my forehead. I clicked that on, and I could see indentions in the leaves where it had been, and the stride was about 7 feet, but it was gone. And I thought, what the heck was that? So I went on back to the house and told Uncle Buddy about it. He told me, well, it's probably not a good day to be camp hunting out there. Just stay at the house. So I didn't think too much more of it. I just thought maybe somebody had wandered up on the land. And but the very next season, I'd moved that same deer stand to a different part of that same land. It was on the other side of the clearing. I was out there waiting for a good shot, and I waited for hours. I'd passed on a couple of does, but I wanted a good buck, and I finally found one. And he was probably about a 12-pointer. He was a good sized buck. He comes walking out of the trees, and he stops and looks around. Gave me a perfect broadside, and I was hunting with the British 303, which is a lot of rifle. I mean, it'll do some damage. I sighted in, moved very slowly, got the sweet spot, and bang, I hit him right, just perfect broadside. And he went down immediately. And by the time I got down out of the trees and got over there, he'd gotten back to his feet and stumbled off, which is not uncommon. But in the leaves where he had dropped the first time was a significant quantity of blood and lung tissue, or as like deer hunters call it, river tube lung butter. It was on the ground. So I knew I got him good, and I knew he wasn't getting very far. So I start following the blood trails, and the blood trail, and I'm talking good, like big splatters, not like little bitty drops. I knew I got him. And there was an area down in the bottoms, down toward the Niagara River, where Uncle Buddy told us not to go. I said it was dangerous, just don't go in there. And when I started heading toward the bottoms, I knew I better catch that deer pretty fast, or it was going to be gone. It comes out. I come to a edge of a little ravine, dry creek bed where it had dropped down. It was about 20, 25 feet down. And I looked down and I could see it. It was laying in the leaves and sticks that were piled up at the bottom of that little cliff. And it was too far for me to drop down. I didn't want to break my leg or anything. So I started making my way down the edge of that ravine until I found a way to get to where it was low enough where I could get down. And all told, I was gone maybe 15 minutes. I found a spot that was about 5 feet. I laid my rifle down, scrambled down, reached up, grabbed my rifle, and headed back down that little dry creek bed. And when I got down there, the deer was gone. And there was no more blood. There were no tracks. And again, it was a very rocky creek bed. So I like start spiraling out, just doing circles around that area, looking for more blood or looking for tracks, because I know that thing was down. It wasn't breathing anymore. It was down because I was looking right down at it. So I had a little Motorola radio on, and I called my Uncle Buddy. I said, "Hey, Uncle Buddy, I think somebody's out here on your land. I think they took my deer." And he said, "Where are you?" When I told him where I was at, he goes, "You're down in the bottoms. Get out of there." And I said, "Somebody's down here. Somebody took my deer." And he goes, "Listen to me very carefully. There is no one down there. If you keep looking for that deer, you're going to join it. Get out of there." So I scrambled out of the bottoms, went back up to the house, and he sent me down. He goes, "Look, your deer went into where they live, and you're never going to get it. If you keep going in there, you're not going to come back out of there. So let the deer go, and valuable lesson learned, stay the hell out of the bottoms."
So let me ask you a real quick question. From the time that you lowered yourself down, grabbed your rifle again, and then headed over towards where you knew the deer was, how long was that?
Maybe 15 minutes at the most.
And it just vanished. It's man.
Yeah, I'm just gone without a trace. Not a track, nothing.
Yeah, I've heard reports of that happening with deer, elk, other game that people have shot. It's like, what do you do?
I've talked to a lot of deer hunters in Missouri that have lost kills. And, obviously some of them just probably wandered out into the bush and they couldn't find them.
Yeah.
And that happens. That's happened to all of us. But it's surprising how many hunters have lost a deer kill and found no trace whatsoever of where it went.
Yeah. Oh, no, for sure. So, and again, how old were you around this time frame?
I was 15.
15.
I wasn't old enough to drive yet. I was deer hunting out on my uncle's land.
So when was the next significant encounter that you had?
We've had some pretty weird encounters over the years. I've had something circle my tent while camping down on the Nangle River Valley, which was the same river that went past my uncle's house just a few miles upriver. I've had things scream at us from the woods. I've had something throw rocks at us in our canoes while floating that same river. We spent a lot of time on the Niangua growing up. And I've found our campsite disturbed and on a number of occasions. I found a large, greasy handprint on the window of my truck one time after coming back from fishing. Weird things like that here in the woods of Missouri are not uncommon. But it wasn't until a number of years later till I had a significant sighting. I had a lot of strange things happen over the years, but it wasn't until years later that I had a significant sighting and knew exactly what it was I was dealing with.
And where did that take place?
That took place in Land Between the Lakes in Kentucky.
That's like the Mecca.
Yeah. Well, I was wanting to write a book about it. I was wanting to feature that in one of my books. And the thing about it is I like to go to the places that I write about as much as I can. Like if I write about someplace overseas, obviously I'm not going to be able to go and just hang out there. But if it's within a day or so's drive of home, I'll go walk the place before I write about it, because until you've been at a place and experienced it, you can't really describe the feel. You can't describe the way the air smells. You can't. So I want to get firsthand knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I had heard all the stories about LBL and went there. So we booked a condo in Grand Rivers, which is across the canal from the north part of Land Between the Lakes. And I was supposed to be meeting a friend of mine there. But I ended all told I spent about a week there. But I beat my buddy there by about 3 days. He wasn't able to get there till after I'd already arrived. And once we got to LBL, that's when I noticed just how truly weird that place is. There was a campground where our condo was at. It was a cabin, not a condo, but there was a campground there, and you would see deer and armadillos and possums and all kinds of animals all over that campground. But you cross over into northern LBL and nothing, not even roadkill. In an entire week I spent in the north part of LBL, I never saw one animal.
Really?
Not one.
Okay, I mean that gives credence to what they say.
Well, the first night we were there, there's a place called Demumbers Bay, which is creepy in and of itself. But the original story about the family of four that was allegedly killed there in '82, was just a couple hundred yards from Demumbers Bay. It was on the same road.
Okay.
Well, I went down to Demumbers Bay, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, my first night there. And I drove down there just looking around. And my wife and my son had stayed back at the cabin. And I was just driving around. Again, at that point, I'd heard the stories about LBL, but I didn't have anything really firsthand to go on. So I wasn't sure what to believe. So I just went in by myself and drove down there. There's a little concrete boat ramp that goes down to the edge of the water at Demumbers Bay. And I pulled onto the top of that ramp with my headlights pointed out toward the lake. And I sat there for a few minutes, and it was just really quiet, and nothing was really going on. So I left the headlights on and got out of the van and went down to the edge of the water. And I was using the lights to look for tracks. Because a lot of times you can find like at least good partials in the mud at the edge of a lake or a creek or a river. Didn't find anything right there near the boat ramp, so I started kind of moving off to the left of the boat ramp farther down the shore. Again, looking at the mud. I had a little flashlight out at the time. And after a few minutes of just looking, it really kind of occurred to me that I'd suddenly moved farther away from the van that I'd planned on. I was probably 40, 50 yards farther down the river. Not down the lake, I mean down toward the mouth of the bay. And I'd moved away, like I said, farther than I planned. So I stopped, and I sat there for a minute. And again, it was still just eerily quiet. And I grew up, here in the woods of Missouri, and I'm used to the night sounds and the animals. And I had also spent a lot of time doing hunting predator. The Missouri Department of Conservation used to have a bounty out on coyotes because there was such an explosion of the population around here that they were offering a bounty for people to go out and kill coyotes. And I would do it for farmers that I knew because they were losing livestock. Mm-hmm. But what I would do is I would play a predator call. And I got the bright idea of trying that out there. And I had a number of them on my phone, but I didn't have a Bluetooth speaker. I just had the speaker on the phone. But one thing I've noticed is that sound travels strangely over water at night. Mm-hmm. And the acoustics are just odd. And I'm sure there's physics behind it that I can't explain. But the sound over water travels odd at night. And I brought up a dying rabbit call and played it on my phone. And I let it run for about 20 seconds, and then I turned it off and just listened. And it wasn't just a few seconds after I shut off the call that I could hear something approaching in the woods rapidly. And it sounded like it was more than one because it was coming from different directions. And I was like, maybe I ought to get closer to the van just in case I just brought something in I'm not ready for. So I started moving it down, back down the shoreline, got down to the boat ramp, ran up and jumped in the van. And slammed the door in the van, fired it up. Headlights were still on, but I fired the engine up, threw it in reverse, and backed up and played my headlights, the high beams, out across the woods as I was turning around. And just back in the woods, and the woods there really thick, but just back in the woods, just where all I could see was the eye shine, was about half a dozen large green eye shine, about 8-9 feet off the ground, just standing there staring at me. And
really?
It was at that moment I realized I probably shouldn't have done that alone, and I headed back for the cabin. That was a lesson learned. When I told my wife about it, she told me I was an idiot for doing that by myself. But I learned a valuable lesson: don't underestimate LBL.
Yeah. Now, was that the sighting you're referring to, or did
no? I had a full-blown broad daylight sighting of a dogman in northern LBL.
I was just about to ask, what did you see? Let's hear it.
On our last day there, Nick and I were driving around, and he has a Hummer H3, real good four-wheel drive. And what we were doing is we were driving down some of the side roads, looking for either abandoned camps or primitive campsites. And most of LBL are primitive campsites, meaning there's no electricity, no running water, anything you want for the campsite, you got to pack in. And we were looking for these because a lot of them are set back in the woods and just have a little trail leading to them. So we were driving very slowly up the road from Demumbers Bay back toward the main road, which is called the Trace. We were driving back up toward the Trace, looking for these little primitive campsites, and thought maybe if we could find a camper, we could, ask them questions, what they'd heard. But I didn't see any campers at all. But we did see a number of those campsites. But as we're driving just outside of Demumbers Bay, there's this little concrete slab bridge that goes over a little inlet. And there was a couple guys fishing on that, but they really didn't want to talk to us. So we just kept moving. And about 100 yards on the other side of that concrete slab, back toward the Trace, as we were driving 3, maybe 4 miles an hour tops. Nick was looking out the left side of the vehicle, and I was looking out of the right. And I saw something, but it didn't register what I was looking at. Because, every deer I've ever shot, I saw it because it moved. This thing was standing completely still, so it just didn't register in my brain what I was seeing. And as we started creeping past it, and I'm looking at the trees, I noticed that it does this. It turned its head to watch us, and when I saw that movement, I zoned in on it immediately. And what I saw was it looked like an upright dog. It had the hawked back legs. It was completely black. At that time, I was guessing it to be around 7 feet tall, but it wasn't a real good guess. But I see this thing, and I'm like smacking Nick in the shoulder, pointing, telling him to stop, and he slams on the brakes. And I saw this thing for probably between 15 and 20 seconds, and Nick saw it for a good 10 to 15. I mean, it wasn't long after I first saw it that I pointed it out to Nick. And once it realized we'd seen it, and we'd stopped, it did this weird kind of loping run. And it didn't just like run like we would. Let me see if I can get on camera. It went off to the right, off to the left, off to the right again, and then went down into a ravine. And of course, at this point, we pile out of the vehicle and go trucking out there, but we can hear it like moving off at a high rate of speed. And it was completely black, no white on it whatsoever. The head looked like it was shaped like a wolf, but the snout was more blunt, like a Rottweiler, like a broader, blunter snout. It wasn't near as like pointed like a wolf or a German Shepherd. It wasn't pointed like that at all. It was wider and thicker. I've had Mastiffs. It's kind of like that, only it didn't have like the jowls that a Mastiff has. Right. Very powerful looking jaw bite. I went over to the tree where I'd seen it standing, and it had its hand against the tree just below a branch. So I had a good frame of reference of where its hand had been. And, if you lean on something, you tend to put your hand at about shoulder level when you lean on something.
Yep.
It's just kind of natural. That's how it was leaning. So I reach up to the spot where I saw it, where I'd seen that its hand was, and it was just like slightly uncomfortable above my head to reach to it. And I'm 5'10", so I estimated it was between 6.5 and 7 feet tall. So it was higher than I would have rested my hand by several inches. In rough estimate, I would say it probably weighed in the ballpark of 300 pounds. It wasn't built like a bodybuilder. It was built more like a dog on its hind legs. But I could definitely see the hands. They were tipped with claws. And again, it was completely black and wickedly fast.
I kind of want to see one, but I don't, So.
Well, it's kind of a paradigm shift. It really is.
Oh, I'm sure.
Believing they exist and then having, is everything. It is no longer, I think these things exist. It's like these things freaking exist, and I don't care what anyone says to the contrary. I saw it.
Oh, for sure. So after that encounter, what's another big one that sticks out to you?
We've done quite a few excursions out into the woods. For about 20 years, I was in law enforcement, and I really kind of had to keep everything on the down low. Doing cryptid research while I was an active cop, because that doesn't always look good on the defense stand. Right. If you're if you're testifying in court, you don't want the defense attorney going, "So tell us about your Bigfoot research," because that won't do you well on the witness stand. So I really kind of kept everything quiet. But after I retired in 2020, I was, then I didn't care anymore. I mean, I'm all in now. But we'd organized a few expeditions with my buddies, Steve Monrodas, with Kerry Pocket Doc Davis, and Robbie Rains, my co-hosts on my podcast. But one of the most recent ones, and probably one of the coolest outings we've ever had, is there's an area, it's an abandoned campground here in Missouri called Combs Ferry. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I noticed in my research is the number of closed campgrounds shut down by the Army Corps of Engineers without explanation. There's at least 3 on Table Rock Lake. There's a couple more on Lake of the Ozarks. There's a couple on Truman Lake. And one by one, we're getting back into these old abandoned campgrounds. Joe Bald is on Table Rock Lake, and it looks like you can still drive into it. It's actually, the roads are still there. You can drive in. But Joe Bald looks like you could go in there with a grounds crew, cut back some of the overgrowth, and open it back up. I mean, most of the campsites in there, while primitive campsites, are still in great shape. You can use the picnic tables and everything else. It's still in remarkably good shape for an abandoned campground. It's been abandoned since, I want to say, 1999 or 2000. Combs Ferry seems to have been shut down longer than that. And Combs Ferry also, they went so far as to bulldoze off the entrances to it.
Really?
They don't want you getting vehicles back into Combs Ferry. So we were planning an expedition, and that's when I contacted a buddy of mine, Wyatt Estes. I believe you know Wyatt and Richard.
Yep.
Richard Brashida. Got a hold of them. They were fans of the show and like my books and stuff like that. But so we kind of got to know each other that way. But I talked to them, and Wyatt said, "Hey, we've got a boat. We'll get you in there." So we planned an expedition when my buddy Robbie was in town, and this would have been last July. Toward the end of July, and so we put a group together. Most of us either current law enforcement, retired law enforcement, ex-military. It was a group of 7 of us that were going on the ground, and the only 2 that weren't either military or law enforcement was my youngest son Noah and Wyatt. But both solid guys. Noah's been going out with me since he was a kid. He knows the deal, and I'm the one that taught him firearm safety. So I know he knows how to handle himself. He's a sharp kid, and he's not afraid of anything. And Wyatt is just that kind of guy too. He's just grew up a country kid and knows his way around a boomstick, and he's not afraid to go in and get his hands dirty.
Right.
So the 7 of us that went in was myself, my son Noah, Wyatt. Richard was going to stay on the boat and move us in and out. 2 of my old lieutenants from my last sheriff's department, Lieutenant Jenkins and Lieutenant Estrella. Both of them, veterans of law enforcement. Estrella has been deployed to Afghanistan like 3 times. Mm-hmm. And my buddy Robbie, who is still a cop, been a cop for like 27 years. So a lot of experience going in on the ground.
Oh yeah.
But Richard was only going to be able to take us in at a couple at a time because it was a bass boat. If we'd had a pontoon boat, it would have been different. But it was just a bass boat, so we had to kind of go in small groups. Well, the lake was really up. It had been raining a lot. So the first group he puts on the ground, he took me, my son Noah, and Robbie all at once. So it was 4 of us in the boat, and we almost swamped the boat going in. We realized pretty quick that was 1 person too many, so we were going to have to do it in groups of 2. So they drop us off on the shore of Combs Ferry, and no sooner has the boat backed out into the channel to go back for the next group when me and Robbie and Noah start hearing things moving. We can hear twigs breaking. We can hear something moving in the woods. So Noah gets out our parabolic mic and puts the headphones in and starts listening. And he said he could hear things breathing, hear things moving very quietly, like breaking, crushing of leaves and stuff. He's like listening all around us, and Robbie and I were just kind of standing our ground waiting for the rest of the group to get there. So little by little, the rest of the group gets there, and once all 7 of us is there, we kind of break out our roles, get everybody assigned. But the more of us that were on the ground, the more the sounds seemed to fade. They were curious at first, but then they backed off when there were so many of us. Of course, we were all armed. So then we start moving in toward the interior of Combs Ferry. And the first thing I noticed is, like I said about Joe Bald looks like you could go in there with a grounds crew, clean it up, and go back to camping there. That is not the case in Combs Ferry. Combs Ferry looks like a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The campsites are destroyed. And I don't mean just somebody went in and broke them. I mean destroyed. It looks like a bomb went off in there. Twisted trees, broken and down, boulders bigger than I can reach around in the middle of the old trails. This place looks destroyed. You would have to basically go in and bulldoze all that back off and then start from scratch to reopen Combs Ferry, which they're not going to do. So we're at this point, we've noticed just how bad it is there. I'm like, this is nothing like Joe Bald. What the heck is going on over here? So we moved farther down the peninsula toward the tip of the peninsula, and we found a track trap, which Robbie's a trained tracker. Robbie actually tracks people for his department. When they have a fugitive, he's the guy they call that will actually track people through the woods. That's what he does, and he's very good at it. We found a number of partials in the mud there at that what we call the track trap. It was an area where water had dried recently, but we didn't find anything that we could cast. We had we had some decent pictures, but none of it was good enough to cast. But we were seeing partial tracks, including one of them that looked to be about 18 inches long. And again, we're just at this point, what the activity around us seems to be just more curious than anything. Noah was still using the parabolic, and he said, whatever it is, it's staying with us, but it's not getting any closer. And while we were down there toward the tip of the peninsula, several of us saw dark figures moving among the trees. They weren't coming out where we could see them, but they were within 30, 40 yards of us, staying pretty close. Mm-hmm. So we continue around. And we have to climb over like deadfalls and lots of boulders and stuff in the path, and it's just absolutely destroyed. And then Robbie and Wyatt discovered something in the middle of one of the old trails. Well, what was left of the trail anyway. Those concrete campsites had concrete picnic tables, and the picnic tables were steel reinforced concrete, and the tabletops were probably 12 feet long by about 7 feet wide by about 8 inches thick. This is not a small piece of concrete. We found one of those that had been ripped off of the picnic table and thrown into the middle of the trail about 20 yards from the campsite. You couldn't do that without heavy equipment, and you can't get heavy equipment in there. It is too broken up. There's no way you could have gotten it in there. And it didn't look like it had been on the ground very long.
So the tabletop
had been torn off and thrown into the trail.
Okay, so I've been to some campsites that's had some of these heavy picnic tables, and it takes like 4 of us to move them, and the tabletop is maybe that thick.
This was concrete, probably weighed in the ballpark of a ton.
Oh my gosh.
We got pictures of that. I think I sent one of them to you. If I didn't, I'll send it to you after the show.
Okay.
But Wyatt may have already sent you pictures of it.
I don't recall pictures of a tabletop.
I'll make sure I send it to you then.
Perfect.
But we at that point we're like, okay, this is getting a little bizarre. And Steve started telling us that his leg was hurting. He twisted his knee somehow. It turned out actually he had fractured one of the bones in his leg, but we didn't know that.
Really?
At some point, going over all that debris, he had landed on his leg wrong, and he had actually cracked one of the bones on the lower left leg. But he was still walking pretty good. He said it was just starting to hurt him pretty bad. So we moved Steve to the middle of the group because Steve's a nurse. Mm-hmm. He was our medic, so everybody's protecting Doc. We've got Steve in the middle of the group, and I was up kind of in the front, and then everybody else was kind of fanned out. And Robbie and Wyatt were at the back of the group. And I turned off my headlamp, and I was just like listening and looking. I'd walked a little ways away from everybody, was listening for anything movement in the trees, listening for any sounds. And Noah at this point was hearing things that sounded like language. He said it sounded like somebody speaking gibberish off in the woods. Unfortunately, at the time, we didn't have a way to record the parabolic, but we do now. So we're planning another overnight expedition out there. Hopefully this time we can record it. But anyway, Noah's telling us, I'm hearing somebody speaking gibberish back and forth off this direction. So we're all like looking and can't find anything. So I talked to the Australia, and we pulled up a map of the area on his phone. And I said, Steve's hurting. I don't think he's going to make the full hike back to where we put in. I said, can you find us an extraction point that's closer? And he goes, well, there's the ruins of an old boat ramp over here about 200 yards from where we were at. I said, Steve, do you think you can make it to that? He said, yeah. He said, that's going to be a lot easier than trying to get back where we were because it looks like it's not as broken terrain. I said, all right. So I called Richard on the radio and said, hey, we're going to be making for the old boat ramp on the opposite side of the peninsula. Can you come around and meet us there? But, don't come in until you see us on the boat ramp. And he said, no problem. So we start moving farther on up this trail, and I'm looking for anything that, like the easiest path for Steve. I'm looking for movement, looking for any signs. But I was keeping an eye on the ground in front of me, looking for anything I'm not going to trip over. And that's when I heard Robbie go, "Hey, DA, you might want to come back here." So I stopped and had everybody stop, turned my headlamp back on, and went back. And that's when Robbie found that chunk of a deer carcass up in the tree, the image I sent you. Blood was still red. You can see the blood still red on it. There was blood and fur, tufts of fur on the ground directly beneath it. And you can tell by the size of that deer leg that is not a very big tree. The tree's not big enough to support a mountain lion. And if you'll also notice, this was twisted around the branches in there. Mm-hmm. That wasn't just dropped in there by chance by a mountain lion. That was left at head level for us to find. Wasn't even flies on it. No blowflies, no maggots, nothing. This was fresh. It had not been there very long. So we're checking that. I'm like, holy crap! What do you think this means? I'm like, frankly, I think it's a territorial warning. And we kind of, that's the consensus we kind of all agreed on, that we found a territorial marker. And like, what are you going to do? So, well, let's get a lot of pictures of it. So there were several people shooting images of it. And then we started to move on, and not 20 yards away on the opposite side of the trail was the head of a fish that had been ripped off just behind the gills. It hadn't been cut. It hadn't been, there you go. You can tell how jagged the edge on there, that has not been cut. Mm-hmm. That was just stuck in the crook of a tree. And we're talking a sapling. That tree was probably no bigger around than a quarter. But it was a pretty decent sized fish head just stuck in this tree right at head level on the opposite side of the trail from the deer leg. And I said, I think this is a territorial marker, because Missouri trout don't normally grow in trees. And so I'm like, I think we just found a territorial marker. I think this is a warning. And I checked the map, and we were still about 100, 120 yards from the boat ramp. I said, well, let's keep moving and get out of this area. And no sooner had we passed that when the activity just amped up just immediately. We started hearing small rocks get thrown at us. We were hearing grunts. We were hearing things moving in the trees. We were hearing sticks breaking. I'm like, I think we just passed the territorial marker, and they ain't happy about it. So we kind of knotted up a little more, got everybody in close together, so nobody was off separated. Everybody had their lights on, and everybody had they either had a weapon drawn or weapon in their hand. Weapon, their hand on it, because we were all carrying pistols. So we finally get out of that section of trees and climb over the bulldozed area, because there's a bunch of rocks and other stuff that they bulldozed off to keep cars from it. And just beyond that is that old boat ramp. And the boat ramp busted up pretty bad. I guess you could probably still use it, and I'm sure some people probably still do, but it has not been maintained in probably 40 years. So it's in pretty rough shape. So we start heading for that boat ramp, and in the trees we can hear grunts, we can hear rocks getting thrown at us. We got pebbles hitting the ground around us. We're hearing tree branches breaking. Noah said he heard more of that same strange gibberish language, and it seems to be getting close. So the seven of us get down to that boat ramp, and I call Richard in, and he comes in. And since Steve was hurt, we put Steve and one of my lieutenants, Jenkins, on the first boat out, and told Richard, get him out of here, get back to us as quick as you can. So they take off, and as soon as the boat's gone, we've got more rocks. They're actually getting closer. They sounded like they were probably 25 yards away in the woods, because the woods are real thick right there. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we're all standing with our backs to the water, just kind of watching. 15 minutes later, pretty tense time, Richard comes in again. The next two get on the boat. And at that, like I said, when we brought three in the first time, we knew taking three on the boat was bad, because like I said, we almost swamped the boat. So Lieutenant Estrella and Wyatt leave in the second group. Left me, my son, and Robbie, the last three on the ground. And when it was just the three of us, as soon as the boat was out in the channel, again, they get closer. And at this point, they're close enough where we're hearing breathing. So all three of us drew our pistols and backed up and had our heels in the water. We were literally standing in the edge of the water with our weapons up, shining flashlights around, trying to find wherever they were. But we knew they were close, and the woods were right up close to us. So we're standing there, and I tell those guys, I said, look, we already learned the hard way that we almost sank the boat with three of us in here. I want the two of you to get on the boat, and I'll stay by myself and have Richard come back for him. And Robbie's like, ain't no way in hell I'm leaving you here by yourself. If you're here by yourself, you ain't going to be here when we get back. I said, well, this whole expedition was my harebrained idea. If anyone stays alone, it's going to be me. And so we're still standing there, and as Richard comes back in to pick up another group, Robbie turns around. He goes, "Hey, Richard, do you think you can get all three of us on this last go? Hey, can we get all three of us on the boat?" And Richard thinks about it a second. He goes, "Yeah, but we're going to have to go slow." And so I'm like, "All right, everybody get on the boat." And I was the last one up into the boat. Put my weapon away, climb into the boat. And as we start backing out, there's kind of a light fog on the water. It's not very thick, but it just kind of a light, patchy fog on the water. And we back out toward the channel, and Richard's got a very bright spotlight on that boat. Yeah. And he lights up the shore where we had just been. And like I said, the woods come right up on either side of that boat ramp. He lights that up, and there's more than a dozen eye shine in the trees on both sides of that boat ramp, all of it high off the ground. Yeah, there wasn't anything big enough to support like a raccoon or anything up on branches that tall because the trees were mostly scrub pines. But there was about a dozen of those things scattered around where we had just been.
No, thank you.
And we tried to get pictures of it. In some of the pictures, you can kind of see the eye shine, but with that bright spotlight and the patchy fog, cameras didn't really pick up much. But yeah, it was pretty intense.
Man, that's crazy.
I thought there for a bit we weren't going to get out of there.
See, now this is a third view of that story because Wyatt came on my show and told that story. And then I had Richard on, and he told me the story from his point of view. And then they both came on because they returned to a similar area and stuff was popping off. I mean, it was amazing.
Timber Rock Lake's a very active area.
Yeah. And then I get your perspective because now, you were pretty much like the group leader. And so you're out in front of everybody. So you're experiencing all of this. And then, from your son with the parabolic, Mike, he's hearing things and Rob is hearing things. Yeah, that's, whew.
It was intense. One of the most intense situations I've been in.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I would love to have been there.
Well, you're welcome to go next time we go.
Well, let's see. I think Missouri and Arkansas honor my permit, so yeah, I think I'll be strapped up too. So,
well, Missouri's a constitutional carry state.
Well, good.
You don't have to have a permit to carry a firearm in the state of Missouri.
Well, maybe I should move to Missouri. So, you'd sent me some there. Now, I tried to load all the pictures, but StreamYard, for some reason, the files were too big, but I was able to shrink a few of them down. And I kind of showed you what I had loaded. Can you explain to me where you found these, who you were with, and anything else surrounding these finds?
That was actually in the old Joe Bald campground on the opposite side of Table Rock Lake from Combs Ferry. It's only a few miles by water, but if you take it by road, it's probably about 10, 15 miles apart. But by water, they're pretty close. This was taken last October. It was just my son, Noah, and I. We went down there to just kind of look around. And we found this. We actually found all four of the legs of the deer. And you can see from the look of that bone, that was not cut off. That was snapped off. Mm-hmm. There's no clean lines on any of it. It's just been snapped completely off. You can see, actually on this one, a great one, you can see sinew, where this had been snapped and then twisted off. Mm-hmm. All four of the legs we found. And we also found the head and most of the hide.
Yeah. And that, unfortunately, those are the pictures that I couldn't.
Well, the head had been torn off at about where the neck bone meets the shoulders. Mm-hmm. It had been basically yanked free, and the hide came off like something had just grabbed it and pulled it free. There were no clean cut lines on it. It hadn't been skinned. There were still vertebrae with meat on it. The only thing odd about the head itself is the horns had been broken off, not cut off, broken off. There were just little spikes left. That's all that was left. The eyes and the tongue were gone.
Yeah, And so when you guys discovered those, and of course you took pictures, what was the atmosphere like around that area?
It's very quiet.
Real quiet.
We didn't
Did
find any tracks. We didn't see any other animals in Joe Bald that day. It was extremely quiet, and those were found on a trail kind of off the road.
Mhm.
So if somebody had poached a deer and skinned it and removed the head and the legs and took them out and dumped them, Joe Bald all they would have had to done is just basically toss them off in the woods from the side of the road. They would not have had to have gone to the lengths of getting farther back in the woods like this. But this was like, I've showed these to people that I know that are lifelong hunters. They're like, no hunter prepares a kill like this.
Yep.
A buddy of mine who's Native American looked at it and goes, no, this was not a person that did this. Look at the way these bones are broken.
Yeah.
He said it took a lot of force to snap those legs off. He said, this was not a person.
And like you and I discussed, when we looked at those, you could tell when there's a predator on a kill because you're going to see those bones crushed, by their
Right.
by their molars and things like that. And those aren't; those are clearly snapped. And I
And
agree.
it takes a tremendous amount of force to do that.
Oh, absolutely! I'm a hunter myself, and I mean the deer that I've taken. Um, we use bone saw if we need to.
Or you take a good knife and take it off at the joint.
Yeah.
None of those
exactly.
were taken off at the joint. Those were
Nope.
you could see chunks of bone sticking well away from the joint.
Yeah, absolutely. That's crazy. So, any other encounters that come to mind you like to talk about?
We found, I think it's we found about 6 disarticulated deer like that now. One down on Blunk Road near Galena, Missouri. And actually 2 down on Blunk Road, and the rest were on Table Rock Lake. So within a few miles of each other, we found now a total of 6 deer that have been disarticulated. This last January, just a couple months ago, myself, my son Noah, Kerry Davis, and Robbie, we went down to Moon Valley, Missouri, which is down on the Niagara River. And we went down and we're doing some calls and filming. And that night we were parked on a low water bridge over the lake, and it was very cold, very clear night. And we tried, just doing some whoops, and we didn't get anything, no response. So then Doc did some owl calls, but he did owl calls from owls that aren't indigenous to Missouri. These aren't not normal owls. We've got barn owls and gray owls and screech owls and stuff around here, but he was doing owl calls from the West Coast. And he got a response, the exact same owl call. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not an owl from around here.
Mm-hmm.
And then Robbie howled like a wolf,
Mm-hmm.
and was right after that wolf howl. Whatever that had responded with the owl call responded to that with the owl call again, and then they came in on us. We ended up getting surrounded. Doc was on the thermal. And Robbie and I had heard something on the other end of the bridge. So him and I, both of us had 1911s. We both had our pistols drawn. We were walking out toward the noise. And Doc said, "There's something over there where you guys are heading." He said, "I can see it. It's peeking around a tree." And he had found, actually, there was 2 of them over there. And as Robbie and I are getting closer, he yells at us. And we were about 50 yards away from Doc and Noah at this point. And Doc yells, he says, "Boys, stop." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "There's one trying to get in behind you from over to your right." So I turned that way and I couldn't see anything. It was woods. It was pitch dark. So Robbie and I start backing up. I've got my one hand on his shoulder and the other hand with my pistol up as we're backing away. If Doc hadn't have seen that, that one would have moved in and cut us off. We would have been completely cut off from the vehicle and the other 2.
These things are not stupid.
No, they're very smart.
That's crazy. So let's talk about your books.
Okay.
So where can people find your books?
You can find all of my books on Amazon under D.A. Roberts author. I've got 34 books currently in print, almost finished with book number 35. Or you can find them all on my website, which is daroberts.net. And if you like cryptid stories or scary stories, then I'm pretty sure I've got something that'll keep you entertained.
Awesome.
Because all of my research that I've done over the last 40 plus years, stories I've heard, encounters, behaviors I've observed, those go into the books. While I do write fiction, real research has gone into the behaviors of the creatures.
Okay, so now you just mentioned behaviors. What is one of the oddest behaviors that you've witnessed? 'Cause
Um,
you have your standards. You have your
mhm.
standard, but what is one that you're like, What did I just witness?" Or it just kinda left you gobsmacked?
Well, my wife and I, this last year for our 30th anniversary, we went and stayed in a cabin up in the mountains of the East Tennessee. We were up in the Smoky Mountains, Great Smoky Mountains, and while we were up there, I did some clacking noises. My sound filter will block it out, but I can pop my tongue really loud. And I believe that part of what they do, what people refer to as wood knocks, is actually done with their mouth.
Mhm.
And I can do this tongue pop very loud. Well, I did it up in the we were up in the mountains. I mean, you couldn't even see any of the neighbors. We were in the thick woods, and I went out there and I popped my tongue on the deck, and I didn't get an answer right away. Didn't hear anything at all. I'm like, ah, crap. So I went back in the house and we played a little pool, and then we went to bed. It was getting pretty late, and my wife, when she was getting ready for bed, I was already in bed. She went in the bathroom, and the bathroom off the master bedroom, the bathroom window was about 12 feet off the ground. And she said as she walked past that window, something growled at her. She couldn't see it, couldn't see anything out there. And she said, well, at first she just thought it was a bear. And so she comes back in and she goes, hey, I think there's a bear outside there. And I was like, yeah, whatever. There's bears in the mountains. Of course there's going to be bears. Didn't think anything of it. She goes to get in bed, and we hear something smack the side of the cabin. And I don't mean like, dude, I mean like,
Yeah.
I'll see stuff shake. Hits the side of the cabin 3 times. So I jumped out of bed and ran out onto the deck with an Austrian piece of machinery made by Gustav Glock.
Nice.
And I went running out there and lit up the area and didn't see anything. There's nothing out there. And I'm like, maybe a tree branch hit the side of the house or something. I'm trying to rationalize it, but I don't see anything. I don't hear anything. I don't see anything. And so I don't think too much of it. I'm like, all right, fine. I get, whatever it was, it's gone. So we lock up, we go to bed. Next morning, we got up, and wasn't even daylight yet. I made a pot of coffee, and I went out on the deck to have a cup of coffee. And I went over to that side of the house and moved a tree branch and looked down. And that side of the cabin, the cabin was built on the side of a bluff.
Yep.
And it was about a 45-degree angle, and I look down, and I see a footprint in the soft soil right next to the bathroom window. And I'm like, honey, come here. I called her out there. She said, what? And I'm like, come here and take a look at this. She said, what? And so I'm not telling her what I'm seeing. I just pushed the tree branch out. I'm like, tell me what you see. She goes, oh my God, that's a footprint. I said, yeah. She goes, how big is that thing? Because we were like 20 feet above it. I'm like, looks like it's pretty good size. So I got my DSLR camera out, had my cell phone on me, and I headed out there off that side of the house. And it was kind of a chore getting down to it because, like I said, it was on about a 45-degree angle. And I noticed that the soil is damp because it had been raining, but it's very rocky. And I look at the indentions that I'm making in the ground, and I'm 5'10", I think it was like 250 at the time, 5'10", 250, and I'm barely leaving an indention in the soil.
Yeah.
But this is roughly an 18 to 19 inch track, an inch and a half into that rocky soil. Yeah, whatever it is was significantly heavier than me. And I could see other partials where it had gone up into the woods, climbing the side of the mountain.
Yeah.
But that one perfect track, it was probably the most perfect track I've ever found. I could see the heel indentation. I could see the outline of the toes. I wanted to cast that so bad, but there's literally no way to cast a footprint on a 45-degree incline. At least no way I know. So I go in and I tell her, I'm like, I've got to figure out a way to cast this. And so we're like brainstorming, trying to think of a way to cast it. And before I can get back out there with casting materials, it just started downpouring rain. Oh. But I took a lot of really good high resolution images of that, and I'll send you some of those too.
Oh, I love
but just absolute beautiful, pristine track. And I put something in the image for scale, and we estimated it was about 19 inches long.
Good goodness.
And considering how deep it was into that soil, and it was rocky soil, it was probably north of 1,000 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I sent pictures of it to Robbie and had him, I showed him with the scale and had him, give me a height and weight estimate. He goes, "Well, I can't give you a height estimate based on the size of the track." He said, "But whatever it is, it's big, and considering the way that you described the soil," he said it's probably every bit of 900 to 1,100 pounds.
Yeah, I'm thinking about going to that what is it? Tennessee Harryman Cryptid and Con in August. And so I'm going to get to meet Harley Owens and Daryl Denton and Martin Groves and Kumbo and yeah, I would definitely like to meet you sometime, as well as Wyatt and Richard and if I'm ever down in the area where I have a significant amount of time, I'd definitely like to go on a little outing with
I'm going
you
to
guys.
be speaking at a couple of conventions this year. One of them is here in Springfield. I'm trying to remember the name of the convention off the top of my head. I just completely was slipping my mind. But it's later this year, and it's in early October. And then there's another one called Spirit of the Forest, which is in Ohio in late October that I'll be appearing at that one. And Russell Accord will be there from Expedition Bigfoot. C. Wayne Tethero will be there. There's going to be quite a few people there.
I've been on C. Wayne's.
Yeah, so C. Wayne's a good dude. He is an awesome dude. I got to hang out with him last year.
So you said the one in Ohio?
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to have to make my way because I'm in Minnesota. So, Ohio.
It's called Spirit of the Forest.
Spirit of the Forest. I'm going to write that down. Yeah, here we go. Spirit.
And I spoke at it last year, and they wanted us back. So
awesome. Spirit of the Forest. And that's in OH10. Okay. All right. Well, I got that written down. I'm definitely going to have to keep my eye out for it. And I definitely want to get out there. I'd love to meet you guys. But with that being said, if you'd like to hang out in the lobby just for a couple minutes after I close the show out, I'd like to show you a couple things and let you hear a couple of things.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. So just go on standby 1 second while I close this bad boy out. You guys, that's our show for tonight. And I'm going to tell you right now, it was everything and more what I was hoping it would be when I got a chance to interview Mr. Roberts. Amazing encounters. You guys check him out on Amazon if you want to get some of his literature. He's working on number 35. He's got 34 done. Just look under D.A. Roberts, author on Amazon. Guys, again, the realm of probability in the cryptid world is just vast. You can say one thing and then something else will pop up. You can experience one thing and then the next time you're going to experience something else. With that being said, if anybody has ever had an encounter and you'd like to come on my show, please email me at thecryptidpodcast72@gmail.com. thecryptidpodcast72@gmail.com. Now, if you still want me to tell, you want to tell your story, but you don't want to be on the show, that's fine too. I get lots of emails like that, and I have no problem safeguarding those emails and those stories. If you'd like me to tell them, I would be more than honored to read your encounter on an episode of my show. As my buddy Josh always says, stay prayed up. And as I always like to say, remember, a legend always begins with a sighting. You guys have a wonderful night, and I'll see you next time.
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?